You call it Maharaga, I call it Makora, we are not the same. Main difference being, I'm actually correct and you are wrong. Jujutsu Kaisen isn't the most complex of series out there, but Gege Akutami has a habit of implementing different concepts that they themselves don't fully understand. This leaves many viewers often confused and results in misinformation being spread around like wildfire. Today I want to go over some misconceptions, perceived plot holes, or just plain unclear explanations. And what better place to start than the incredibly heated debate of Makora versus Maharaga. When I did the review for episode 17, there were tons and tons of comments correcting me on my usage of the name Makora. No, it's Maharaga, they said. The voice actors got it wrong, they cried out. Unfortunately, Maharaga has always been wrong. At least literally. The actual reference for the name is a little muddy, and it's been a pain doing the research for this. I don't have any Japanese friends, so asking around to fact check is a little tricky, and Google translating Japanese forums isn't doing me any favors either. So here's a couple of things that I found with just a little bit of Googling. The Maharaga entry in Wikipedia tells us that it's a race of deities in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. The physical description of them as anthropomorphic creatures with serpentine bodies also bears some similarities, and apparently these deities are said to protect the Dharma. And when I click the little blue text on Wikipedia and scroll down a little bit, look what I find. This makes it look like this was the true inspiration for the character, but where does Makora come from? To find that out, we have to make our way to the 12 Heavenly Generals, where we find Mahala. That doesn't sound like Maharaga or Makora. That's until you look to the right and see that the Romaji reads Makora. But what complicates it further is that when we go and look at the actual Heavenly General himself, doesn't really scream Maharaga to me. So, is it Makora or Maharaga? The literal translation is Makora, while Maharaga could be seen as the likely inspiration for the Shikigami. So, if you want to be snobby and have everyone know how right you are and how wrong they are, then go with Makora. If you don't care, no one's gonna give you shit if you say Maharaga instead. How was Sukuna able to use his open curse technique after a domain expansion when fighting Maharaga? When a domain is opened, until it either collapses or gets deactivated, you're able to use your curse technique within it. The open is presumably part of Sukuna's curse technique, as seen here where he tells Jogo that he won't reveal it so as to not cheat. We can also infer that the domain is still active when Sukuna kills Haruta, because he dies right after entering the rage of the domain. Your takeaway could be that he simply died so fast he didn't realize he even got sliced as he was walking past Sukuna, but I think the domain still being active is more in line with the series' power system as a whole. All this to say that the domain was still active during the fire arrow, and that's how Sukuna was able to use it in the first place. During the 299 seconds following Gojo's 0.2 second domain expansion, he prioritized killing transfigured humans instead of disaster curses. Why? The disaster curses were much bigger threats, so I don't get why he didn't deal with them immediately after the domain expansion before wasting time on fodder. This one is explained in both the anime and the manga, but it leaves a bit of a sour taste for most people. The narrator tells us that the disasters could awaken at any moment, and Gojo would be in danger of a counterattack. To us, this seems like a minor inconvenience for Gojo, since he was blasting Hanami and Jogo with only his cursed energy just a few minutes beforehand. But Gege's writing style is like this throughout the entire manga. If you've seen my power scaling video, you remember me talking about how Gege places a lot of emphasis on handicaps, matchups, or circumstances in general. From a power scaling point of view, it makes no sense why Gojo couldn't just blast them normally, even if they had countered. But Gege doesn't seem to think so. In their mind, a Gojo without the ability to use his curse technique is in real danger against the collective jumping. I mean, what's stopping Jogo from just unleashing a ton of lava in the area? He is a special grade even though he gets bullied. However, this doesn't inherently have to mean Gojo would lose, but his goal in Shibuya is to minimize casualties, and if the disaster curses woke up and started blasting, the casualties would continue to pile up and the use of unlimited void becomes null and void. Ha. Hey you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. You've been watching for a little bit now, so how about you scroll down and hit that like button? Thanks. Is Maharaga's adaptation a curse technique? It likely is a curse technique, but here's why I think it might not be. I don't speak Japanese, so I can't really go back and confirm or deny this, but Sukuna refers to Maharaga's adaptation as an ability. This is a super minor distinction, but if it was an intrinsic ability of the Shikigami, then something like Inverted Spear of Heaven wouldn't work on account of it not being a curse technique. In the fanbook, Gege makes it a point to say techniques and powers when talking about 10 Shadows, while also never outright saying whether Maharaga's adaptation is a curse technique or not. So up until we get the fanbook 2.0, I lean towards it being an ability rather than a curse technique. This one is weird. Sukuna as a cursed spirit. Not exactly a comment that I've gotten, but it's something that I've seen a lot, and it's a weird one. I don't exactly know the origin of this, but Sukuna being labeled a cursed spirit by the Jujutsu Kaisen wiki is a blunder that still echoes, even to this day actually. There have been tons of articles that make the same mistake over the years, and it's one that gets answered in the opening few chapters of the manga itself. In chapter 3, Gojo specifically makes it clear that Sukuna was a human, as if directly talking to the readers, and yet this mistake has still remained years after. I suspect that the reasoning behind it is because of the word curse in Jujutsu Kaisen. The word curse in Jujutsu Kaisen can be used interchangeably for practically everything really. Geto is described as a curse on account of his depravity, curse users aren't any different from Jujutsu sorcerers in terms of their abilities, and of course, Sukuna is the king of curses, aka the strongest of all time. It can get a little bit confusing, so in most cases you should be looking at the context more so than the word in a vacuum. Point is, Sukuna is a human, despite his curse-like appearance. See what I did there? Can you explain the reason Mahito attacked Fei Geto in the previous episode? Mahito attacks Fei Geto for a pretty straightforward reason. He just never really trusted him. Right after Gojo's sealing, Mahito stares daggers at Fei Geto once he tells them that he won't participate in their hunt for Yuji. This is our first and only clue in Shibuya that they don't exactly trust each other, and Mahito attacking him at the end is the conclusion. He was out of transfigured humans and aware that his own death was imminent, whether it was at the hands of Yuji or Fei Geto. His only chance of survival was transfiguring Fei Geto and using that as an opportunity to run away like he did at the school against Yuji in their first battle. The real reason Mahito always knew is because he is born of humans and he knows about their deceitful nature. How are curses able to use reverse curse technique? Wouldn't the positive energy tear the curse apart from the inside? Okay, I know what you're thinking. TikTok comments are cheap shots because half of these people watch the show through TikTok on mute at 2x speed with Subway Surfers gameplay on the screen. Of course, they're gonna say some dumb shit, and yeah, that makes it even funnier. Humans use RCT, which takes up double the amount of cursed energy. Curses, on the other hand, are made purely out of cursed energy, meaning healing for them is super easy and only limited by the amount of cursed energy that they have. Reverse curse technique is positive energy. So yes, cursed spirits would get annihilated on the spot if they had RCT used on them. Sukuna tells us as much when blocking Maharaga's Blade of Extermination. Despite his overwhelming strength, had he been a cursed spirit instead of a human, he also would have died instantly. He literally said he doesn't need to clap his hands, it's a mind game to make the enemy instinctively react. This one I chose because it was just hilariously wrong, with thousands of people sharing in this delusion. For context, this is a comment on a clip of Todo using his cheeks to clap out of Mahito's grasp. The commenter is making the assertion that Todo in fact does not need to clap his hands in order for Boogie Woogie to activate, because all that clapping is used for is tricking the opponent. This is obviously wrong, and the confusion likely stems from the panel of Todo clapping and not swapping places in his fight against Hanami. If the commenter had actually read the whole page, they'd have seen Todo say, "Clapping my hands is the trigger." On top of that, why did Todo even go through the trouble of clapping Mahito's hand if he could just teleport normally like Shimazaki? Speaking of the mystery clap against Mahito, it's either an animation error or a cut that wasn't finished in time and didn't make it on screen. If you pause at the right time, you can actually see Mahito's sword hand broken off and stabbed into the ground, implying that Todo broke it and then quickly clapped right after. I still think he used the cheeks personally. Fake Geto and real Geto. This isn't so much a misconception, rather something I've seen confusion about. Also, I'm going to address it now on video. I say Fake Geto to keep my video spoiler free from anime onlys. All the smartasses trying to correct me in the comments, you're not that clever, stop it. The point of confusion for a lot of people seems to be the timeline of events. It goes a little something like this. The Brain is an ancient sorcerer that has been around for 400 years at the bare minimum, with Noritoshi Kamo, no not that Kamo, being the last named vessel. That gets us to 400 years ago. Fake Geto tells us that Kamo is one of their numerous names, and the implication is that they're much, much older. The final nail in the coffin is Fake Geto telling Sukuna that the Age of Hand will come once more, potentially signaling at him being 1,000 years, or even older than that. For those that are confused as to how Fake Geto even got the body, Gojo simply never cremated the corpse and just buried it somewhere. Fake Geto is a master barrier user that even got Mahito and the rest of the disasters in the school undetected. So even if Geto's body was buried within Tengen's barriers, it shouldn't be an impossible task to retrieve it. So where was Yuta throughout the whole show? Episode 23 sucks. This is just a case of something not being revealed yet and people being weirdly combative about it. But at the end of Jujutsu Kaisen 0, the post-credit scene has Gojo meeting up with Yuta in Africa. For some reason or another, he's there alongside Miguel, and that's likely where he's been throughout Season 2. Speaking of Yuta, how does he still have Rika? This one is a rather minor thing that gets explained later on, but a lot of discussion has cropped up, so I thought I'd address it. Yuta shows up at the tail end of Season 2, he slays this curse, and then it gets eviscerated by Rika. But Aryan, you might cry out. Didn't Rika's soul depart at the end of Jujutsu Kaisen 0? How is she still around? And to that I'll say, it isn't a retcon. Rika is 100% gone and the events of 0 are canon. The reasoning behind her still being around is explained, notice the quotes, but it's a weird and frankly vague explanation. Manga spoilers ahead for the remainder of the video. The narrator tells us explicitly that the Rika we see before us is simply the storage device for Yuta's curse techniques that the original Rika left behind. Throughout the manga, this Rika is always written with quotation marks around to signal to us that it isn't the real deal. What this Rika really is also not explained. Whether she's a cursed spirit or Shikigami remains to be explicitly stated, but with her seemingly regenerating herself in recent chapters, a cursed spirit could be the likely answer. Ultimately, she's a shell of the real Rika, but maintains her personality. I guess Rika's ego was just that big. Have ever heard about the origins of this meme being that the translator messed up? This comment is in reference to the now iconic panel of Gojo, where in the original Viz release, the translation for the line was, well, this. I don't know how they got no in the first place. The panel itself is a callback to chapter 3, so they could have either used "Nah, I'd win" to acknowledge the callback, or just used something similar like "No, I will win" or "I will win" to fit in within the context of the scene itself in chapter 221. Instead, they somehow got "no" and ended up creating one of the funniest reaction images at the time. Since then, it's obviously been corrected, with a new version becoming the most meme panel in Jujutsu Kaisen history. How come Sukuna used the fire arrow in Shibuya while Malevolent Shrine was active, but in the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, it says that you can't use any technique while you have granted one to your domain? During the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, Sukuna is unable to use anything not imbued within his domain, in this case the slashes. In order to have Mahoraga adapt, he had Megumi shoulder the burden of adaptation, which meant that the Ten Shadows technique was in use the entire time. We find out you can't use two different techniques simultaneously, but because the domain is already imbued with Sukuna's slashes, it's a different ball game as Gojo calls it. And that's all for today. If you've personally got any misconceptions that you've seen that you would like me to clown on or explain next time, leave it in the comments and I could potentially make this into a real series. Thanks for watching!